Next, we'd like to look at how we can turn these valuable insights into action. And for that, I'd like to turn the time over to Lukas Vermeer, our Director of Experimentation.
Thank you very much. Experimentation is at the heart of Booking.com's culture. Almost everyone in product development will be running experiments, no matter what their role is. And rather than running those experiments myself, my job is to help these people run experiments correctly and to help them feel empowered to run those experiments and figure out what really makes our product better for our users. One of those people is Finn Hansen. And here in his own words, he summarizes how he uses experimentation on the job. He says, we use it to validate hypotheses with a goal of addressing well-defined user problems and with the goal of learning as fast as possible in the most rigorous way as possible. And so as Finn points out, we always start with a very clear description of our user problem. What is the thing that we're actually trying to address and how do we want to see a change in our product and what change do we want to see in our users' behavior? Now, once we have thought and found a problem, then we start thinking about solutions. And this is very similar to the way that the scientific method actually works. And so we use a very similar mechanism. We use a clear hypothesis that describes how we're going to solve this particular issue. Now, to help our users internally in our product development teams define these hypotheses, we have what we call a hypothesis template. And it has all of the bits in it that actually make a good scientific hypothesis. We have a theory, a mechanism. How do we think that this particular change is going to help our users? Some validation steps. How will we know that this actually worked and that we were successful? And lastly, we describe a clear objective. Why do we think this would be an improvement? Why do we think this would help our customers, help our partners, and help our business? Now, to give you a few examples of how the insights that Javier and Molly have shared with you before could turn into product development, I'm going to show you two examples of lines of experimentation, of hypotheses that were actually tried out by our product development teams. And so the first hypothesis that we might come up with is that since our users are interested in having a safe space, having an entire property, highlighting those kinds of properties to our users might help them find those particular properties. So here's an example of the template filled out for that idea. We see an increased traveler interest in privacy and entire homes. We believe that highlighting properties of that type for all users will help them book those specific properties more often. Now, once we have defined a hypothesis like this, we've clearly defined what it is that we're testing and how we're going to test it, we can then go to implementation, where for all of these different platforms, you'll notice that the visual implementation of this idea is actually slightly different. In the app space, we use a different icon than in the desktop space. And that's because these are different products. But all of these implementations are still implementing exactly the same hypothesis, exactly the same idea, which is that if we surface this information to users, it will be useful for them and it will help them find these entire homes. Now, what we saw in this particular experiment is that this does actually help a particular set of users find these properties that they're looking for. And we can see them click more on these properties. We can see them navigate to them more. We can see them purchase them more. And so this was actually a successful line of experimentation that is currently rolled out to all of our products in production. Now, the second example I wanted to show you is a different line of experiment that is very similar. It's actually based on the exact same set of insights that were shared earlier. But here, we hypothesize that not just surfing this information is useful, but we actually want to give people the option of telling us explicitly that that is what they are searching for. In other words, again, based on increased traveler interest in privacy in entire homes, we believe that making it easier to specify this preference at the search stage will help them find these properties more easily. We're going to surface them more in the search results and thereby make it easier for users, again, to find and book these properties. Now, in this case, once we've defined the hypothesis, we go to implementation stage. And in this case, there's a complication because our user interface is obviously a complicated device that has all of these different elements in it. And we can't just keep adding features to this product. Sometimes one feature needs to make way for another. in this case, the search box already has a checkbox where users can specify a preference, and that is the preference, I am traveling for work. Now, because the team didn't want to load our users with too many options, they decided that this new checkbox, this new I'm looking for an entire home checkbox, should replace the existing one rather than add complexity to the user interface. And so we're taking away one feature, I'm traveling for home, and we're replacing with another. Now, when we looked at these results, again, on these different platforms, the same hypothesis is implemented in slightly different ways. But when we looked at the results overall, we noticed that this does not actually help our user base as a whole find more of these properties and book more of these properties. And so it was not successful and it was not shipped. And if we look into the results more deeply, we can get some sense of why this might be happening. It seems that there are some audiences where traveling for work is actually more important than the ability to book an entire home. And so these two groups are at odds. They want different things from our product, and replacing this feature wholesale for everyone doesn't give us an overall benefit and doesn't give users, importantly, an overall benefit. And so this was not shipped. And we might investigate whether we could tailor the product to these particular audiences, but that would be a new insight that would require a new hypothesis and, as a result, a new implementation. So to summarize, we saw two implementations of two very similar hypotheses that were based on the same insight. And experimentation was the tool that allowed us to figure out which of these implementations actually gives the users the benefit that we're looking for, solves the problem that we intended to solve. And so having an insight is a good beginning, is a good start when it leads to a clear hypothesis that can then be tested in an experiment. And at Booking.com, we try to empower all of our product development teams to think in this way, to think about what problems they're solving and how they're solving them. And that is really what gives us the speed and agility that gives people like Nakia, a copywriter in one of our teams, when we asked her, like, how do you use experimentation in your work? She talks about empowerment. She talks about freedom. She talks about the ability to make a change that she came up with over breakfast, to make that change before lunch. And this is all made possible by having this deeply embedded culture of experimentation where everyone is encouraged to challenge their ideas and to try out new things.
Thanks so much for this, Lukas. This has been fascinating. Many of us watching, I'm sure, are wondering how we can apply this culture of experimentation and create it within our own organizations. To do that, what advice would you have?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And I get asked the same question a lot. And it's not that difficult, I think, to get started down this path. Obviously, embedding experimentation as deeply into your corporate culture as much as Booking has is not something that you do in one day. This is something that takes years and years to develop and frankly, to iterate on and improve, right? We're not done. We're still improving. But if you want to start this sort of path, then I hope that the hypothesis template can already give you a guide. Because to be honest, the problem is not so much technical, right? It's not about building fancy systems that allow you to measure lots of things. The problem is more conceptual, of learning to describe what is the problem that you're trying to solve, the theory, right? How are you going to validate that this has actually happened, validation, and then the objective of what is it that you're actually trying to achieve with this change. If you can start taking some of your key initiatives and pour them into this framework of a hypothesis where you say this key initiative has this objective and this validation step, then I think you're already one step in the direction of becoming an experimentation-driven culture.
Thanks, Lukas. This has been fantastic. It's been great having you join us today.